Hello everyone, we're back. Today's show we will be speaking to Dr. Tom Gannon Hamilton. He is a poet, musician, actor. Many of you have heard of him. His 2018 poetry book, El Mario, won the Big Pond Rumors First Place Prize. Panoptic, just recently released by Aeolus Press, features his original artwork and poetry. Is absolutely incredible, launched just a few months ago. As an actor, he has been in Murdoch Mysteries. He also had a role in Shape of Water, which swept the Oscars in 2018, and in the American Gods series on Netflix. And today we are going to be talking about how Canada can capitalize on our art and talent and keep our homegrown talent here while inviting other people in to our country. And we ask the question, are Canadians really as diverse as we think we are? Tom, thank you for being on this show. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Ivy. Great to see you again.
Yes, absolutely. So, you've got your PhD in educational studies. You've been on the scene for such a long time. And I know that you are very in tune with the current political and cultural situation. And you see a lot of talent. You used to like to say it hemorrhages out from Canada. Mm-hmm. How do you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I see things as changing. Things are always changing. And in this regard, we have now, I think, an opportunity to start inviting people to come here. We have tremendous resources here in Canada. And in Toronto, particularly, when you look at the way our technical and traditional arts spheres are beginning to interact more, and the silos are breaking down between the traditional arts. What we have then is a real ferment, what we might call a ferment. We have an opportunity now then to start taking stock, first of all, of what we have in terms of resources and beginning to mobilize them for the benefit not only of the artists who live in this country, but really for the entire country, for the entire nation.
And the entire cultural society as an economic value.
Indeed.
And this is, I mean, it's interesting too, because we are getting a studio coming to Toronto in a couple years. Mm-hmm. And there is a palpable difference between, you've been to the States, you're a session musician, you've played around the world, and you've seen the difference in how people, especially on the art scene, market themselves differently in the USA versus Canada. I mean, there it's like you can, at a gig, you can put down your business card without shame, but as Canadians, we seem embarrassed to market ourselves almost when we're on the art scene. What do you think about it? What do you...
Well,
what's the differences?
We have an ethos in Canada which tends to support the other aspect of it, which is just simply historical materialist. We have conditions that are post-colonial, where there's a mentality that what we produce at home somehow can be bettered by something that's imported. We see this is a real tacit belief, it's an assumption. It's not something that people talk about, so it doesn't get interrogated. We don't interrogate that assumption, so it's perpetuated. What the result is then is that other aspects of production that we could be taking charge of, we don't, because we just simply assume that somebody else should be doing that or is doing that. And recently there's been some discussion even on mainstream news about why Canadians don't seem to be taking charge of their talent and intellectual capital the way other people in every other country do.
You have an interesting piece on this. So we're going to pull up, we have a few slides to talk to. And the first slide you can see here on the screen. So it's interesting. So we have ambitious people. Anyone that's successful as an artist in any, but in the financial world, for example, it's okay to be ambitious. But as an artist, if you're ambitious, now you were telling me, this is based on our conversations, we created this slide, and then that equals threat. Yes. And if you're not ambitious, if someone is not ambitious, then they're not interested in gain. So now there's this culture of mediocrity in Canada, in a way.
Sure. Well, ambition really takes the form of immodesty. You have to have a lot of chutzpah or you have
Yeah.
to have like what you would call some kind of gall or some kind of audacity. You have to have a kind of courage, really,
Mm-hmm.
in order to say, hey, I've got something that's really going to make a contribution. I've got something that you really shouldn't ignore, that's really valuable. So first of all, acknowledging that you have something of value, it's a bit of a cultural no-no in a situation where, or shall we say, within a cultural milieu, where the highest virtue is modesty.
Yes.
One thing that you never want to do is appear conceited,
Yeah.
appear like a know-it-all, or appear that you are arrogant, or that you think that the world, owes you their attention.
And that's specifically a Canadian cultural thing. We are known to be modest, accepting,
Yes.
tolerant,
Yes.
and
Well,
and
we're known globally as a people who apologize too much and who are unaffable people with bad hair.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I'm not sure my
I heard
hair's
somebody say that,
doing.
right? We try to compensate knowing that, right? But we don't always succeed. But ambition then is associated with immodesty.
Mm-hmm. No good.
Yeah, no good, because what you'll have is a lot of people around you saying, "How dare you?"
And
I
if
remember
someone's
once being in a round robin where I announced that I was a poet. Afterwards, not at the time, but afterwards, someone came up to me who was really incensed. She was really offended and said, "Oh, come now. Nobody calls themselves a poet." Well, why not if that's what you do?
But the thing is that if we think about it, ambition leads to excellence.
Mm-hmm.
It raises
That's right.
the bar. When we have
It certainly does.
Yeah, and when any person has something to strive for,
Mm-hmm.
you want to strive for excellence, and that
That's
makes you
right.
ambitious. So if we are, as a culture, looking down on ambition a little bit because it's immodest,
Oh, not even a little bit.
yes, but if it's seen as immodest and that is not culturally acceptable, then in a sense we are hindering our excellence. And there's this common phrase: when one does do well as an artist and you're doing well, then people will say to you, "Well, what are you still doing here in Canada?"
Sure.
And-
It's like a promise, isn't it?
It is.
When you take that step forward and you say, "I can do this," or "I can solve this problem," or "I've got an idea that I think hasn't been heard before, that I think is worth a listening." If you were to go forward and say that, then you better be forthcoming with something of value.
Mm-hmm.
You
Absolutely.
better put your money where your mouth is, so the bar is set high. And then you have to perform up to that level. And you have to perform up to that level where you have already a field of naysayers, right, and detractors who are all set to jump on you and say, "How dare you?"
Yeah,
Right.
or eclipse it. And that leads us to our next slide, which is really interesting about our culture here. So in Canada,
This is my favorite.
I know. In Canada, we pride ourselves on it being a very diverse country.
And so
And-
because it's diverse,
Yes.
we have to be
Excuse me.
the bottom line is we have to be tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't get very far on that bottom line, do you? Because as we're living together, going about our lives tolerating one another, we don't really have a system of meanings that we're sharing, right?
No, we're just tolerating
We're-
them. So
we're-
are we really incorporating
Well,
them?
we're kind of looking askance. It's really a kind of vigilance, right, that's required there. And that vigilance really prevents other kinds of functions from taking place for the individual and societally in general. So let's just say that if we go from this point where we are no longer just tolerating, but we're going to celebrate, and I mean more than just going out and saying, "Let's have the cuisine."
Yeah, or the
That's
annual fair
yeah,
and
no,
dress up
or
in
the annual
costumes.
fair or what have you, flavors of the whatever and sort of thing. That's a superficial thing, isn't it? But
It's
underneath
paying homage to it, and does it go deeper than that?
it sure does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because underneath it, besides the fact that from a DNA standpoint we are very much related to one another,
Mm-hmm.
we also have some certain other things in common that we have to live in a world that's meaningful, and we have to seek then something that is other than what we already have. right? And now, if you've been thoroughly acculturated in a situation where you've seen regurgitated, so we say Mick culture that regurgitates the same images, or so I like to call it self-cannibalizing. You know, you have a film being made out of some other cultural form that was made decades ago, when it comes around again, and you see it during the course of your lifetime. It might come around 3 or 4 or 5 times. And you say to yourself, well, do we really need a remake of, say, Papillon? Or do we need this? Do we need a cartoon show like Flintstones to be made into something with real actors, right?
Well, even with the recent, a few months ago, when they remade The King and I was done
Yes.
by Mervish again.
Another good example,
and then
right?
people
Yes.
were
Yes.
addressing, because that's from back when Thailand was Siam.
Yes.
Or Siam,
Yes.
the exotic Western lens. And then, should we show that? Is it relevant or this or that? As long as, and then there's always this kind of discourse
Yes.
between hiding history or, let's tolerate it and accept
But
that it
wait a minute,
was...
though. But we could easily disingratiate ourselves with those people who have a lot of emotional attachment and a lot of nostalgic attachment to these things.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough,
I'm very nostalgic as an
those
individual,
people
but-
with the most attachment to them are the most likely to be offended by a remake. But
this brings us to the
being,
capitalization. And the next slide. But what is the point? Go on.
well, the point is that when we get to the point where we're actually acknowledging really what's there in social difference, when we're actually engaging, when you engage social difference, what happens then is there's a catalyzing effect
Well, this brings us to the next slide that talks about the capitalization, the catalyzing. So here, take a look, Tom. Because the social difference you're talking, and then one must need to explain this, because I don't really understand.
Well, the point at which we are no longer simply tolerating, no longer simply acknowledging one another's presence, we get to the point where that curiosity that we have, and we can talk more about that, but that spirit of inquiry that we have about the other leads us to discover things that we didn't know before. And that's exciting. Doors are opened, maybe just a crack at first, but then we go storming in to take a better look, and we discover things, right? So we can be stimulated to the point where we experience something like an epiphany, and what we were provided with, what we had been given to understand our world, suddenly seems utterly inadequate. That we have a whole new lens, a whole new cultural lens with which to view the life we're living. So that kind of excitement starts to convert what was just simply exotic or some kind of lip service or something lying nascent in society. That's our acknowledgement of the enormous diversity that we have.
But it doesn't translate to resource base.
No, and
tolerance and celebration don't. And that's the problem.
Well,
in a sense, and we'll get to that, because if we can't support
we problematize it, and there's a reason why we're problematizing it. Right? The reason why we problematize being stuck at this level is that this is a level of underdevelopment.
Social deference,
and it gets us back to this issue then of how then does this ethos, then how does that work? It works in this way, is that we have chronic underdevelopment in the sense that the understanding is that we're going to be living a kind of a hand-to-mouth existence, paycheck-to-paycheck existence, that we carry a certain debt load, that we're never out from underneath the pressure of that. We carry with it as well a kind of an underdevelopment of the self, where we're not really in any position to come anywhere near to taking stock of what we have. And now what we have is not individually possessed, is it? Because in this transformation where we became aware
of a cultural form.
Yes, of a cultural form that now is our cultural form because we've invested in it with every chakra we have, with our mind chakra and our heart chakra and in a sense the investments of the body, which are very, very powerful. We become then catalyzed. Now,
But you have said we don't have a marketing scene.
No.
In regards to the arts. And when we were chatting before, you made a really good connection how tolerance and celebration don't match the resource base.
That's right.
But capitalizing does. What is it that Americans, let's use them as an example, because a lot of our talent bleeds to the USA.
Well, first we have to acknowledge that there are differences in scale. Just obvious differences in scale. We have a population of what's our population now in Canada? 33 million. And it's 10 times that approximately in the States. Now, when you have a certain economy of scale, that means that qualitative differences begin to accrue. What I mean by that is that when you have a size of a market, that also allows for greater diversity. That allows for diversity to be marketed.
And
right?
They're tapping into it in the States. And then
forever. That's that has always been the case.
And then the resource leads to wealth, which increases a sustainable social economy.
Yes. Well, we could talk about what wealth is as a kind of commonwealth. Let's talk about, for example, what we really mean by talent capital and what we really mean by, or the potential of capital, because it's not really capital until it's been transformed.
Absolutely,
right?
And that leads us to the next slide, which kind of shows, here we go. Modesty is where we're at, which is a higher virtue, but how can this be made profitable? How can we capitalize on our talent and tap into the diversity?
Well, almost a moot question, right? Because everybody who's watching this has already answered this, realizes that as long as this is the case, as long as our highest virtue is modesty, then we're already limiting ourselves in terms of what we're going to develop or how we're going to develop. And I think we need to move on and talk about development, how that works. Because capital is something that arises in a situation where you have R&D or research and development.
Yes.
So, really the arts are no different than sciences. In the sense that if you want to develop technology or science, then it consists of research, which means that there's a lot of time that's put into experimentation. There's a lot of time that goes into developing the product, right? Whatever that product is, it's a cultural form of some sort.
And you have even said to develop a world-class artist, we need to release people from the subsistence world strategy, where an artist is often hand-to-mouth existence.
Absolutely.
And they're not having the time or energy to put it into their passion.
Well, it may be,
then passion can't grow.
It may be one of the reasons why artists are assumed to kind of be hatched, and that cream will rise to the top, and somehow miraculously people with talent will emerge as top, on the top of things, right? This is a very dangerous presupposition if you want to develop the economy, because what that says is, we don't really need to invest in the arts. So let's talk about what arts investment actually is, right? Because, in order to have a product that's sold for profit, you have to have one that is worthy of being sold. In other words, it has to have some value invested in it, other than just the energy that the artist put into making it, right?
Absolutely.
The cost of materials, the time that they spent on it. And I have to say that the majority of people who live a kind of paycheck to paycheck existence, they're not likely to feel that anyone should have an advantage over them in terms of what they would be taking with their time off of work is leisure time, right? And that leisure time is what the artists use, the so-called leisure time, is what the artist uses to
make their art,
to create whatever it is that they're creating. Right?
And then there's less energy, and you have...
The important thing is that they're only making their art in the interstices between bouts of work that they take in order to survive. Now, personally, I can name 20 different jobs that I had, all of which I really enjoyed. Why? Because they didn't interfere with the process of my making poetry.
Yep.
And people around me could say, "Oh, you're still here? Why haven't you moved on?" I remember that. Somebody said that, right? And I went, "Well, yeah, I'm enjoying this, right? I'm actually enjoying being here." But what I was really most enjoying was having all of this time, and particularly mental space, to be able to create. Right?
Yeah, so the artist finds a way to prioritize their art and has to make
Sure.
concessions on an economical level.
Yes.
And often,
Absolutely.
and as you and as you've pointed out to me, I mean, artists are relying on grants.
Yes.
Even the publishing houses are. Everyone is. And I know you have this.
I mean, it's a good thing we have granting
because
organizations,
we would have nothing.
Right? And you know, I mean, as well, let's not use this as an opportunity to bash anyone. Because everything that exists for a reason, right?
I'm very happy.
And all of the
grants.
successes that we see are there for a reason, right? So this is not. I just want to clarify that this is not in the spirit of bashing well-established industries that exist in the world, particularly around the arts. But it is a way of saying what we need to do is be able to climb out of this subsistence strategy that we're engaged in, right? Because if you want to develop our art scene, if you want to develop the individual artist, if you want to sell art, then you have to have research and develop the equivalent of research and development, which amounts to some kind of investment in the time that the artist really needs. That is their greatest asset, is their time.
And
now,
everyone has a gift, and if they have the time, they can hone that gift, right?
Yes. It's that time. You know, Malcolm Gladwell talks about there being a necessary 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything. Where is the 10,000 hours going to come from if you are living hand to mouth and doing some kind of job that is absolutely unrelated to, and you have to deprogram yourself from it in order to get back into the mode of producing? And let's be very clear on what the mode of production is in arts. It's quite simple. Everything that you do in your life brings you the materials from which you're going to make your art, all of your experiences,
Yes.
right? That's the full range that's there. The artist, and somebody once asked me this question, what's the difference between an artist and a non-artist? I said, that's really easy, right? The artist takes everything, gathers everything for the purpose of, as a pretext to arranging it, right? And making it into something that will stand as a sign against conventional automatized signs, right? Which gets us probably into our next thing.
Also you had, absolutely. So
How are you going to do that, though? You have to develop it, right?
Yeah, and the next slide talks about that. And here.
Okay. This is getting complicated, isn't it?
It is, but I mean up here, so if I'll just read for viewers, but if we have a dozen low-profit activities, so in this case the arts, represented in our community, the investment capital that we require for one area to be developed has to come from another area, such as grants, which, for example, and then there's the subsistence strategy, which is the law of diminishing returns. An area of activity that does not have enough to sustain itself cannot give anything in return.
Absolutely.
And then that comes down to when new energy, such as capital, does not enter the system, we create what is essentially an arts ghetto.
That's right.
And that equals hindered and underdeveloped growth in the result under these economical pressures. And this is why the arts culture is potentially underdeveloped.
Yes.
And this is all your wording.
Well, it's just because... Now, this is almost comes as a kind of a disclaimer, right?
Yes.
But really, what we have in this, let's just look at these points individually. Now, what I mean by the laws of diminishing returns is also something like the race to the bottom, right? Because taking all of these other aspects of the ethos that we're talking about and how they restrain us. These are assumptions. They're tacit assumptions that people carry. They're really what some people might call core beliefs, right? They never get interrogated, right? So first of all, if you have the courage to challenge the conventional notion that you had best be doing something other than developing your creative abilities, right? If you challenge that and say, well, no, actually, there isn't anything better that I could be doing with my life and with my time, and it's not just for me, it's for everybody. So when you start saying, oh, well, my self-care results in, you start seeing that taking care of yourself, or really what amounts to investing in yourself, really starts to take care of more than yourself, right? It starts to make you a provider, right? Yeah. That's how you begin to generate wealth. And this is what we're really talking about when we're talking about wealth. But with the arts, it's something even more interesting. It's almost like a quantum development, or an exponential development of the capital investment. What do I mean by that? Suppose you become successful in conventional terms.
Okay.
Suppose what you have produced passes muster, right? On some kind of aesthetic level, in peer review. Your fellow artists and eventually, maybe a slightly broader community. The way in which it happens today is that it emerges internationally before it is recognized at home. We should say that again, right?
Yes. Well, then that kind of goes with the disclaimer. I mean, if a market doesn't have the means to turn something into capital, someone else will.
That's right.
And this is why Canadian talent is hemorrhaging out into other nations where the talent can actually make a living, and the other nations' economy.
I'm not sure that it is to the same extent. I think that we're at now a moment where the one epoch is ending, and we're entering a new one. And I want to just simply announce the new one, first of all, right here and now, so that we don't have any more, shall we say, mistaken notions about this. This is not about the future. This is about what's happening actually right now. Because for a long time, independent producers have known that they reach the world from wherever they happen to be. Now, for me personally, I enjoy reaching the world from Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Yes.
Why not? Why not? I mean, but I know people who are interested in reaching the world from some rural location. Why not? The idea being that what happens is that now we circumvent the local fame, the local hero phenomenon, and we move directly to speaking to our audiences and presenting whatever is that we have to offer visually as well on this wonderful mediated ethosphere that allows us to do that, right?
Absolutely. But let's bring in, you had a very good example the other day that makes this relevant on an economic level. So in Oregon, the 2005 Housing First Initiative.
Yes.
They had Portland, Oregon had the largest homeless problem, and the mayor in all of the United States announced that they're going to build houses for everyone.
Yep.
And because those people were living a subsistence existence, subsidiary existence, and he built and he did the math.
Yes.
And it was cheaper to provide housing for, I don't know the numbers, but you probably do, for all of the homeless people than keep supporting them on a hand-to-mouth assistance.
It was the largest, apparently it was the largest homeless population per capita. And at that level, again, we want to talk about scale, because at that scale, you have municipal budget being exhausted through, medical, social services, infrastructure, policing, blah, 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 and so what the mayor apparently was able to do was convince everyone using, crunching the numbers and actually making a heuristic device to show people what's actually going on. The long and the short of it is, it was best to free people up from the cycle of struggle and subsistence, every day getting up and looking for your meal. It was better to give them a home and then to build out from there the an individual who was functional, which is what they were able to do.
Yeah, they actually, I think they said by 2010 they'd have decreased the homeless population by 1/3, and actually they decreased it by half.
Yes, they went beyond what they had projected.
And by 2015, I think it was completely eradicated.
Well, and the interesting thing here is that if you adopt it entirely, which was the entire municipal policy, then you get best results. Now, Canadian cities adopted it partially, and so you get partial results.
But I like the parallel, though, because if we think about it, you said to me, and you're right, many of these people, it was the first time in their lives that they had their own shower, hot water, their own bed, and it's not like they were given a house forever for free. But they were given that platform which allowed them to say, oh my gosh, I do not want to lose this.
That's right.
And they then became members of society, able to participate, active members, keep their homes. And so if you flip that to the arts, and if making our art can somehow generate economic returns, wouldn't people rise up?
I think we should also clarify that because this is for everybody, let's continually reflect on the whole, right? Because this is what we need to be addressing. We're not talking about conditions that are only for artists. This is the situation with everybody. Everybody produces or is capable of producing something. Everyone bears human resources, and I mean that in a way that HR never meant. We talk about HR, but it's time for us to appropriate the term human resources and see it in its broader light. And the full human resources that we're talking about have to do with everything that every human being is capable of producing. And first of all, what they produce is a self. I happen to value that self, no matter what that self is, right? They don't have to be setting the world on fire. This is the way we're related to one another, and this is the way we invest in one another and care for one another. Is that we don't say, well, I love you because you're an important resource base. we love one another first of all, right? And then we go, let me count the ways. And then we start saying, oh, wow, well, look at the wonderful human being you're producing here, right? Okay, so what are the dimensions of that? Well, there's a kind of a thoughtfulness, right? There are a set of actions. There are things that we do. There are practices that we have, right? And they're very endearing, but they're also very valuable. And this is where we make this. This is where we have to make this
work.
Yeah, we have to say that, okay, I think that your time in this world is worth something. And I think that if I invest in you and I see the promise that exists there in your ideas and in your motivation, I'm completely confident that if you're freed up, that is, if you have your domicile and your 4 or 3 squares a day taken care of, that you are going to focus on the thing that you do best. And you're going to keep working on it, and you're going to keep working on it until you produce something that is of world-class quality. I will bet you anything that if you get that 10,000 hours,
absolutely,
if I could buy you that 10,000 hours, I have faith that what you're going to do is going to bring something that is going to not just reflect well on you, but is going to bring benefits to everybody around you, including our entire society. This is where we start talking about building a social economy on our creative and intellectual abilities.
And I just want to put up our last slide, and we'll talk about this in one moment because it's relevant to what we're saying. But in regard to what
the last slide. I'm sad about that.
I know, me too. But what the thing is as you've said to me, some people might, it is true. I mean, we are having a mental health epidemic.
Yes.
It's all over the news. It's reported 2-3 times a year in the major and mainstream media. To the extent that if they didn't report on it, people would say, what are you doing? So it is a health epidemic. And the thing about art, as you've stressed to me, and many of us know this, but it satisfies a profound psychological need within the individual that the limitations of conventional society just simply don't meet. And rule governments is there to keep us in one place. However, the arts and culture allow us to grow. And that comes down to, again, how, like you were saying with the previous slide,
Well, it's even better than we once.
If we invest in letting people grow their one talent or passion and get the 10,000 hours in, we are kind of feeding into a mental health system in that everyone is feeling more nourished, whether they're producing art or something else.
I think that the benefits can't even be estimated.
Yeah.
I think that first of all, the size of the problem that we're facing is hugely underestimated. I believe that the average adult Canadian would be, if they were to take them into a clinic and have them tested, they would test as mildly depressed.
Yeah, and that's become the norm, which is sad.
And if you look at the symptoms of depression, they include withdrawal, they include the inability to personally invest in the things that once interested us. So there's an entire mentality, an entire set of attitudes that goes along with depression, which also serves to keep suppressed our potentials, and our developmental potentials are definitely suppressed when you have people who are disinterested and withdrawn. Now, when you see people who are stimulated, right, they invest.
I
right?
love your movie theater example with that. I think it's worth mentioning. So how we function as a society, we go into the theater, Cineplex Audion, and the adrenaline gets going.
Well, that's a junk food metaphor, right? Because if we have a spectacle, an explosion, for example, when you walk into a cinema and you see even in the especially in the trailers,
yes,
right? There is this assault really on the senses, which is the result of many years of upping the dosage, which is what you have to do when you're addicted to anything, right? So it gets louder, it gets brighter, and the images change more rapidly, right? And that has been on the increase.
Look at a 1930s film versus a film from today.
The extreme expression of any kind of motif that you want, like, for example, the torture motif. Right, incidents of torture went from some low level to some through the roof, within recent years. Right, so there's this necessity to always be upping the dose. What goes on in the meantime then is that entertainment becomes associated, or has been increasingly associated with this addiction to the spectacle. All right. Okay. Let's talk about what the spectacle is, right?
And the biochemical level of the adrenaline.
And the effect of a spectacle is this: like anything that one is addicted to, you get your hit, you get your fix, right? And that's good for that moment.
Adrenaline produces endorphins.
But you need more, right? Now, at the same time, you have other areas of your life that are being chronically undernourished, right? And what is it that's being chronically undernourished is meaning systems, right? Because the meaningful aspect of living, right, that's the aspect that keeps us connected to one another, connected to our environment, our social environment and our natural environment, right? It is nothing but a network, or if you want, web work of significances or meaning. That's what we're suspended in, and that's what makes our lives worthwhile. So it's really, there are some profound needs that are not being taken care of when we're talking about entertainment. Let's be clear about this. When we're talking about entertainment as an industry, and as an industry just like junk food production, that will produce something that is momentarily satisfactory, but leaves you needing more.
Such as
what you're actually needing, and what actually drives you to take more, is you're missing the more profound meanings and a deeper engagement. And what I mean by that is that every form that we're presented with says, engage with me on one or another level, right? If you engage with it on the superficial level, that's what you'll get out of it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And this has a lot to do with the investment that we're talking about. Now, when you invest in meaning systems that are something more than a spectacle, when you invest in something more than the sensation, which is what art is, if you want to define art is anything that has that negative capability, right, as Keats said, something that has the capacity to draw the apprehending subject into it, right? And I mean, a good example is you would never say that a great work of art, such as the Mona Lisa, right, is you're not going to compare it to something else. You end up comparing other things to it. So this is the thing is about the authentic work.
Yes.
The authentic work causes you to invest on many more profound levels than the spectacle does.
And that leads us
Right.
into this question
Yeah.
of diversity, because when we're only paying homage to it, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we're only paying homage to diversity by either tolerating it or celebrating it, but we're not actually really looking at it and how can we tap into these various cultures and art forms and capitalize them in order to grow our own social economy as a country, we're not really embracing diversity. Whereas
and it might
when
be
we
easier.
can invite, and you wanted to send out an open invitation, but
Yes.
when really, if you embrace something, one must not self-identify as an American or as this or as that or whatever culture you come from, because it can, if it's integrated into the economic system in a way
Yes.
that it's capitalized on, then I would think that produces a more authentic diversity than simply paying homage to it.
But
Am
I
on
don't
the
want
right
I don't want to jump the gun, and I don't want there to be any mistakes about this connection then between what it is that the individual invests in when they invest in their own resources, right? Their own creative and intellectual resources, right? What happens then when we start to invest in one another's, right? What we are actually investing in is something much deeper than entertainment and much more powerful, which might seem like an irony to people, but it is really the thing that is going to be most motivating and most transformative for people is that deeper engagement. And we need to have examples of that. A good example would be Leonard Cohen. Right? Why is Leonard Cohen? Why does he come to mind when you were asking people to ask a person on the street, name a Canadian poet? And the interesting thing is that it was making that poetry into music, really. The Tower of Song, as he calls it, right? It was
And
that
he needed to do that in order to make
Yes.
money. He needed to turn his poems into songs.
Yes, and it was a way of saying, let's get something that people really can engage with, that people really can find deeper meaning in. Let's make it available to them. So it's an interesting point, isn't it? When you think that, we can have something that's of great value and profound value that is really art. And we can have art that is entertaining, that it is not an either or. It's not that just because the spectacle dominates entertainment doesn't mean that you can't have art in entertainment. And there are lots of cases where art has entered into the mainstream entertainment world, right? And those are the areas where we should be very vigilant, where we should be taking stock of those, right? All of us should be. Right, and then you'll see, for example, that in our own milieu, right, in our own milieu being in the Canadian setting, let's be very clear about this. We have people who are producing. Geez, I don't have it with me, but I mean, I could look at it. I could try and come up with a list, but I've listed them before. Those singer-songwriters and those poets and those painters and those people involved in theater and those people involved in filmmaking and in all of the media who live here actually in our community. And we know one another, we recognize one another. We already know what there is there in terms of talent capital. And in most cases, for us to acknowledge them means that they've already spent their entire lives developing it.
Yes.
So it's been developed to that point. They've made that personal investment. So far, the investment that we have in one another. That's as far as we've been able to make if you want to say, like, monetize it or capitalize
Is
on
the
it,
next step.
or and I think the word is really transform it, right, into a set of meanings, right, that is going to satisfy the needs of a broader population, right, and it's not just the Canadian population,
Yeah,
but
and then
but
the world, and bring the world to us.
but I think that's happening.
It is.
It is, and I've heard about recently about American musicians, poets, painters, all kinds of very talented people recognizing that they could come here,
Yes.
and they're going to experience, first of all, a safe place, a place that has all of the resources necessary for them to be able to carry out any kind of production that they want to carry out, especially multimedia productions.
Yeah.
Right? It's
starting to happen.
It's well on its way, and so I don't have a doom and gloom sort of view on that.
Neither do I. And I mean, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. But you are right. I mean, even the fact that Amazon opened up offices here, that we have a movie studio opening up in Toronto as well in the coming 2 years, I believe.
Sure.
And Canadian talent is recognized worldwide.
Yes.
And this is the beginning of a conversation that I think we will continue.
Yes.
And about how to create a sustainable cultural arts scene that not only capitalizes and brings capital in for the artist and our own social economy, but really by that creates that authentic diversity by embracing it. Because if it's part of our culture,
yes,
we need money to make it happen, right?
Yes, and it is coming.
Yeah.
It is coming. It's there to an extent, but we're heading to an explosion. And we can talk, I think we should talk in future more about this mechanism, because we're going to have lots more examples of how mechanistically this actually takes place, where we really do have an infusion, and what the effects of that are, because the effects are very positive, right?
Yeah.
And like you're talking about, retail.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of shutting down and moving away, retail flourishing,
Yes.
communities flourishing, and the money that people spend on the drugs that they need in order to maintain some kind of well-being, that can be, gradually it can be redirected, and we can be weaned of our bad habits, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which aren't
the
just substances. We have lots of bad habits of mind as well. That's what we've been talking
The
about.
possibilities are endless. I do want to tell our viewers, though, we're going to put Tom's info on the screen. And Tom is a session musician. He's a violinist. His CD, actually, which was called, Enduring Alterations, features his original artwork as well. And it's actually a musical docudrama from 2013 with 10 original songs, and one of the only pieces of its kind to be featured in the Holocaust Museum.
That's right.
In Washington, D.C.
And we should say that the executive producer on that, herself, a Holocaust survivor, is Miriam Biner.
Yes, Miriam Biner. You can also find Tom. He runs he's available. He has an agent. He does acting, gigs, everything. His email and phone number is here. He will have a website soon. Order his latest book, Panoptic, online at Aeola's House or Amazon, and you will also see his works. He's one of the featurette artists in the Artis 4 magazine that's coming out in March. And you can find him at the Urban Folk and Music Salon that Tom runs. It's the last Thursday of every month out of the Mount Pleasant Library. And let me just see here, because he's got a number of upcoming events. So the next salon will be February 28th. And on March 19th, he will be on CIUT-FM with Valentino Essenza, live on Howell Radio. So you can tune into that. And March 22nd, he will be performing a violin accompaniment to David Stone's acclaimed Fringe theater show, Infinite Sequels, at the Toronto Arts and Letters Club. And on the 26th, he will perform a Yiddish translation, a Transylvanian selection on violin, accompanying Holocaust survivor Leslie Mezel in his poetic recitation during the launch of the memoir of the Aga Khan Theater. and more. If you need more info, reach out to Tom. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Ivy, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
And we'll talk soon. Thank you. We'll be back in a few.